lot of videos on YouTube now. Why was Full Custom Garage canceled? In fact, it wasn't canceled. I quit. I said I've had enough.
Ian Roussel from Full Custom Garage has been at the center of a story that many people still do not fully understand. For years, fans watched him build incredible custom cars with skill, patience, and pure creativity. But suddenly, things began to change, and the silence that followed left people asking serious questions. Some even called it a devastating tragedy, wondering what really happened behind the scenes of Ian Roussel and Full Custom Garage. As episodes slowed down and updates became rare, confusion started to grow, and rumors filled the gap left by answers. Was it pressure, change, or something deeper that caused this shift in his journey? Join us to find out what happened to Ian Roussel and how devastating it was. The sudden disappearance that stunned fans. The moment fans noticed something was wrong, it did not come with a loud announcement or a breaking headline. It came quietly. Episodes stopped showing up the way they used to. The energy around the show began to fade. People who had followed Ian Roussel for years suddenly found themselves asking the same uneasy question again and again. Where did he go? And what really happened behind the scenes? For someone who built machines out of raw metal and imagination, Ian was never the kind of person who chased attention. His work spoke loudly, even when he stayed silent. That is why the sudden gap felt so strange. It did not match the steady rhythm fans had grown used to. One day, everything felt normal. The next, it felt like a door had slowly closed without anyone noticing. At first, many believed it was just a short break. Shows pause all the time. Creators step away and come back stronger. But this time, the silence stretched longer than expected. The questions became louder. Some people started to worry. Others began to guess. A few even believed something serious must have gone wrong. The truth, however, was not something dramatic or explosive. It was something much quieter, yet still deeply unsettling in its own way. What made it feel like a tragedy was not a single event. It was the absence of answers. Fans were left with pieces that did not fully connect. A man who once shared his creative world so openly now seemed far away, almost hidden. And in today's world, where everything is constantly shared and explained, silence can feel heavier than bad news. There was also something else that made this moment hit harder. Ian was not just a TV personality. He represented freedom. He showed what it meant to build something from nothing, to follow passion without rules. Watching him work felt real, not forced. So when that presence began to fade, it felt like losing more than just a show. It felt like losing a rare kind of honesty. But here is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The deeper people looked, the more they began to realize that nothing about this situation was as simple as it first seemed. There was no clear ending, no final statement, no obvious reason. Instead, there were signs of pressure, change, and a quiet shift that most people never noticed while it was happening. And that raises a bigger question that leads us forward. If nothing terrible happened on the surface, then what could possibly cause someone like Ian Roussel to step back from something that brought him so much recognition? The answer begins long before the silence, in a time when everything was just starting to rise. The rise of a self-taught custom car genius. Long before the silence confused fans, Ian Roussel was already walking a very different path from most people in the car world. He was not trained in big schools or backed by large companies. He learned by doing, by failing, and by trying again. His workshop was not a place of perfection. It was a place of sparks, rough edges, and bold ideas coming to life. That is where his real journey began, far away from cameras and public attention. He was known for turning simple metal into something unexpected. While others followed clear plans, Ian often trusted his instincts. He could look at a pile of parts that seemed useless and imagine something completely new. This made his work stand out. It was not just about building cars. It was about creating something that felt alive, something that carried his personal touch in every corner. People who discovered his work early noticed this difference immediately. There was no copying, no playing safe. Each build had its own story, its own shape, its own attitude. This kind of creativity is rare, and it slowly began to draw attention. Not because he was trying to be famous, but because real passion is hard to ignore. As his reputation grew, more eyes turned toward him. What started as a personal craft slowly became something bigger. Car lovers admired his fearless approach. They saw someone who was not afraid to take risks, someone who could turn imagination into reality without waiting for approval. This made him special in a world where many builds can start to look the same. But there was also a quiet truth hidden in this rise. Ian worked best in his own space, at his own pace. His creativity did not follow strict schedules. It came in waves, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. This freedom was the heart of his work. It allowed him to stay original and true to himself. Without it, his process would not feel the same. As more people became interested, opportunities began to appear. One of those opportunities would soon change everything. It would take his private world and place it in front of a wide audience. For many, this would be a dream come true. But for someone like Ian, it would also bring a new kind of challenge that few people could see at the time. Because while success can open doors, it can also bring expectations. And expectations can slowly begin to shape the very thing that once felt free. The same independence that made Ian's work so powerful would soon be tested in ways he had never faced before. That turning point, the moment when his quiet workshop met the demands of a larger stage, is where everything begins to shift. And it all starts with the show that introduced him to the world, the show that made him famous. When the show that would later define his public image finally arrived, everything around Ian Roussel began to move faster than ever before. What had once been a quiet, personal craft was now placed under bright lights, cameras, and tight timelines. The world was introduced to his raw talent through Full Custom Garage, and almost instantly, people were drawn in by something that felt different from anything else on television. Unlike many shows filled with loud arguments and staged drama, this one focused on the work itself. Viewers watched ideas take shape from bare metal. They saw mistakes happen and solutions follow. It felt honest. It felt real. And most importantly, it felt like Ian had not changed who he was, even with cameras around him. That authenticity became the heart of the show. As episodes continued, his fan base grew stronger. People admired not just the cars, but the way he approached each build. There was patience in his process, even when things went wrong. There was creativity in every design, even when the path forward was unclear. It made viewers feel like they were part of something genuine, something not overly polished or controlled. But behind that smooth viewing experience was a different reality slowly forming. Television does not run on pure creativity alone. It runs on schedules, deadlines, and expectations. Each episode needed to be completed within a certain time. Each build had to fit into a structured format. What once flowed naturally now had to be shaped to fit a system. At first, this change was not obvious. Ian still worked with his hands. He still built in his own style. But little by little, the pressure began to grow. Ideas that once had time to breathe now had to move faster. Decisions that once came from instinct now had to align with production needs. The balance between freedom and structure became harder to maintain. There is a quiet tension that comes when passion meets pressure. On the outside, everything looks successful. The show gains attention. The audience grows. Opportunities expand. But on the inside, the process can start to feel different. What once felt like pure expression can slowly begin to feel like responsibility. For someone like Ian, whose strength came from working on his own terms, this shift was not small. It was a major change in how he created. And while fans continued to enjoy the results, very few could see the weight building behind each project. This is where the story deepens. Because the same platform that brought him recognition also introduced challenges that were never part of his original journey. And as those challenges grew, they began to shape decisions that would later leave fans confused and searching for answers. The real question now is not just how the show made him famous, but what it quietly demanded from him in return. The hidden pressure behind the cameras. As time went on, the pressure behind the scenes became harder to ignore, even if it was never openly discussed. What viewers saw on screen was smooth and creative, but what they did not see was the growing weight of constant production. Each build was no longer just about passion. It had to meet deadlines, fit into filming schedules, and deliver results that could keep the show moving forward. This kind of environment can slowly change how a person works. For Ian, whose creativity depended on freedom and patience, being placed inside a fixed system created a quiet struggle. Ideas that once took shape naturally now had to be rushed. Mistakes, which were once part of the learning process, now carried more pressure because time was limited. The workshop was still the same place, but the feeling inside it was beginning to shift. There is also the mental side that many people overlook. Creating something new again and again is not easy. It requires energy, focus, and a clear mind. When that process is repeated under constant demand, it can become exhausting. Even the most passionate creators can begin to feel drained when there is little time to pause and reset. At the same time, being in the public eye brings its own kind of weight. Fans expect consistency. They expect new ideas, better builds, and steady progress. While this support can be encouraging, it can also add silent pressure. The need to meet expectations can slowly replace the joy of simply creating. For someone who started out working alone, this shift can feel overwhelming. Ian was not used to working for an audience or under constant observation. His strength came from being independent, from building without outside influence. Now, every move was being watched, recorded, and shared. What makes this situation more complex is that none of it looks negative on the surface. Success was clearly there. The show was recognized. His work was appreciated. But success does not always mean ease. Sometimes it brings challenges that are harder to see because they are hidden behind good results. Over time, small changes began to add up. The pace, the expectations, the constant demand for new content all started to shape his experience in ways that fans could not fully understand. And when these pressures reach a certain point, they often lead to one important decision. That decision is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it happens step by step without a clear announcement, but it can lead to something that feels sudden to everyone watching from the outside. And this is exactly where the confusion begins. Because while Ian was dealing with these internal changes, fans were only seeing the result. Fewer appearances, less visibility, more silence. It raised questions that seemed simple but had no clear answers. So what did all of this pressure finally lead to? And why did it make it seem like he had suddenly disappeared? What really happened to Ian Roussel? As the pressure continued to build quietly over time, what fans began to notice was not a single shocking event, but a slow change that felt hard to explain. Ian Roussel did not announce a dramatic exit, and there was no confirmed incident that marked a clear ending. Instead, there was a gradual fading from the spotlight, and that silence created more questions than answers. From the outside, it looked like something sudden had happened. Episodes became less frequent. Updates were harder to find, and the steady flow of content that once kept fans excited began to slow down. People who had followed his work closely started to feel unsure. In a world where everything is usually explained immediately, this lack of clarity stood out. It made room for speculation, worry, and confusion. But when the situation is examined more closely, it becomes clear that what looked like a disappearance was more of a shift in direction. Ian was never someone who relied heavily on public attention. His identity was built around working with his hands, not being constantly visible to cameras. So when the structure around him changed, it naturally affected how much of him the public continued to see. There is also an important reality about creative work that often gets overlooked. When a person spends years producing under pressure, especially in a system that demands constant output, there comes a point where stepping back becomes necessary, not because of failure, but because of balance. A break does not always mean something is wrong. Sometimes it is simply a way to protect the original passion from being worn down. In Ian's case, the shift did not erase his work or his identity. He remained connected to the world of custom building, continuing to create outside the loud space of television. However, because the media spotlight was no longer focused on him in the same way, many fans interpreted this reduced visibility as something more serious than it actually was. This misunderstanding is what gave the situation its emotional weight. When people are used to seeing someone regularly and that presence suddenly becomes rare, the mind often fills in the gaps with concern. That is how stories of tragedy or disaster can begin even when no such event has been confirmed. At the same time, it is important to recognize that creative individuals often move in cycles. There are periods of intense visibility and periods of quiet work. Ian's journey seems to reflect this pattern. The difference is that his earlier fame created expectations of constant presence, which made his quieter phase feel unusual to those watching from afar. Over time, the combination of reduced appearances, limited updates, and natural curiosity turned into a narrative that felt bigger than reality. People were not just asking where he went. They were trying to understand why someone so visible could become so quiet without explanation. And that question leads directly into the final part of this story. Because once the confusion is stripped away, what remains is not a tragedy in the traditional sense, but something more subtle. It is the story of where Ian Roussel is now, and how his life continues away from the spotlight that once defined him. Where he is now, and the truth fans didn't expect. When the confusion is set aside and the rumors are removed, what remains is a much simpler reality about Ian Roussel. There is no confirmed tragedy, no verified downfall, and no official record of a dramatic ending. Instead, there is a man who stepped back from constant visibility and continued his life in a quieter way, closer to how he originally worked before fame arrived. Ian's world was never built around fame in the first place. It was built around creating vehicles from imagination and metal, working with patience, and following ideas wherever they led. Long before television, he was already shaping his identity as a builder, not a celebrity. That foundation did not disappear just because public attention shifted. It stayed with him. As time passed, his presence on television became less central, but that did not mean his craft stopped. He continued working on custom projects, focusing on the kind of builds that reflect personal creativity rather than public expectation. In many ways, this return to privacy can be seen as a return to his natural rhythm. The noise of the outside world became less important than the process in front of him. For fans, this change created mixed emotions. Some felt disappointed because they missed seeing regular updates. Others felt curious, trying to understand why someone with such talent would choose a quieter path. But when viewed clearly, his decision reflects something very human. Not everyone is meant to stay in the spotlight forever. Some people step into it, learn from it, and then step back out when it no longer matches their way of living. What makes Ian's story interesting is not a dramatic ending, but the contrast between visibility and privacy. At one point, he was widely recognized through Full Custom Garage, admired for his unique approach and creative independence. Then, slowly, that public stage became less present in his daily life. Yet his identity as a builder remained unchanged. This is where the misunderstanding often happens. When someone becomes less visible, people tend to assume something must have gone wrong. But in reality, life does not always follow a straight line. Careers evolve, priorities shift, and sometimes stepping away from attention is simply a personal choice rather than a reaction to crisis. Ian's journey shows that creativity does not always need an audience to exist. Some of the most meaningful work happens away from cameras, where the only focus is the craft itself. In that space, there is no pressure to perform, only the freedom to create. So when people ask what really happened to Ian Roussel, the honest answer is not wrapped in mystery or tragedy. What happened is a transition from public visibility to private creation, from structured television production back to independent building, from being constantly seen to choosing when and how to be seen. And in the end, that may be the most important lesson in his story. Not every silence is a sign of something broken. Sometimes, silence simply means someone has returned to the place where they feel most themselves. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.